And then we can look at the three different ways of rendering light in Unreal. So Unreal renders light in three different ways. The standard way is light mapping everything. That's what's been done to these meshes. You can see this is light map because you can pretty much see the pixels in it. It's a bit more blurry, dirty. You can see the individual pixels kind of shine through, etc. I have this example level here, lighting, light mapping. That shows you exactly that. So it's a cube on a bigger cube. You can see this is light map. What light mapping basically does, and I can show you in the content browser, is it makes a picture of the lighting and it multiplies it on top of the material, the texture that's on the mesh. You can see these are the light maps it has generated. For example, in particular this one. You see it's pretty much a picture that it applies to the mesh. So this is the picture that it put on this mesh. You can see this is the shadow you're seeing over there. And this strip on the side of it, that is probably this side, because there's another light over here. So it pretty much unwraps the mesh onto a texture and it bakes the lighting information on that. And then it takes that picture, that lighting texture, and it multiplies that with the texture. In this case there is no texture, it's just gray, but that's pretty much it. Depending on how high the resolution is of this picture, the shadow is sharp or it's blurry. So this is the same thing, just low resolution light map. I can tell you why this is better and worse than the other methods in a bit. Let's first look at the second method. That's Vertex Lighting. Vertex Lighting is not used that much. This was the original way of lighting things in Unreal Engine 3 and also Unreal Engine 2. It's a bit of an older method. Light mapping is starting to replace that entirely now, but it's still useful, and it's especially important to know this because you might accidentally get Vertex Lighting, and then you should be aware of what it is and how to recognize it. So this is Vertex Lit here. Something gets vertex lit when the environment artist or the person who made the models did not define light map coordinates. So if in the mesh, when you import the mesh and you set up the mesh, you do not have light map coordinates, you can see if I set this to 1 and I press this button, show UVs, I can see the coordinates. This is correct. If this would have been blank, if this wouldn't be here, or it would be red or wrong or whatever it would be, but it wouldn't look like this. And details on how to correctly light map things can be found in my 2 asset development videos. But if this wouldn't be correct, then you would have to refer to Vertex Lighting, and it would refer to Vertex Lighting when the resolution is 0. So if resolution is 0, it automatically becomes Vertex Lighting. If not, it's light mapped. So that's what I did on the cube here. In the properties over here, I temporarily set override light map resolution, and I set the resolution to 0. So now this cube is vertex lit. And then I have a light there. I'll temporarily move the block up. So the thing with vertex lighting is it applies the lighting to the vertices. That's why it is called vertex lighting. If I make the light a bit smaller, then you can see if I make sure that the light covers only a small portion of the mesh, because the mesh is here, and it pretty much only covers the top part, then right now it looks correct, because again this is the preview lighting, this is not what it eventually will be. But once I rebuild lighting, and I'm gonna quickly rebuild without light mask because it doesn't have to be very correct. Again, light mask is something we'll get back to later on, but quickly turn it off. Rebuild, and it looks like this actually, see? So even while the radius is only this big, the entire mesh is, or half the mesh, is lit. And that is because it only applies the lighting to the vertices, so only to that point and that point. And then it will fade this vertex information, the lighting it captured on this vertex, to the next couple of values. So over here, this vertex has 0 lighting, it's black. this vertex has say 100% light, so it's 100%. So then in between those two vertices, it will simply fade from 100% to 0, so you get a long gradient. Likewise downwards, where the next vertex is here at the bottom. So it pretty much converts lighting to vertex colors. It's also important to know that it's not a standard mesh. If you were to do this with a standard mesh, it would look different. If I add a mesh again here, it's the same cube. Can do the same thing. I'm gonna turn on override light mode resolution and set the resolution to 0. The light is also touching that corner there. Rebuild again. And you can see the other one doesn't even light up at all. Either it will not light up at all, or it will light up better than this one. And that's because Unreal has a built-in system to try to improve on this. This is default vertex lighting behavior. This is what Unreal Engine 2 does as well. But Unreal Engine 3 has a system built in to kind of lessen the impact, the ugliness of pretty much this system. See, it's different now. The entire thing kind of lights up, but not that much. The reason for that is this is not exposed in the editor, but if you copy paste this to Notepad, like so, and you copy paste this in somewhere, anywhere, doesn't really matter where, but it has to be in the first part. B, use subdivision false, and then copy paste this back, and then rebuild. It looks like that. So this single line, this line use subdivision, this is an Unreal system built into the engine to change the way vertex lighting renders. That's not that important. You probably will never ever need this. So I'll quickly briefly mention it. Either way, that's vertex lighting. So it basically converts the lighting into vertex colors, and it stores the lighting only per vertices. Again, also if the light happens to be in the middle of two vertices and you rebuild, you will not see anything, etc. And then lastly, we have real-time lighting. Which is this. So we have a single light here, and this is a point light movable, and that casts dynamic shadows and dynamic lighting. This is also the only type of light that doesn't require a rebuild. You do not have to rebuild this. You can freely move, place, modify this, and immediately play, and you would still see the lighting. Okay, so then we can have a look at why these three, what's the benefit of each of these three systems. So light mapping is pretty much the standard. It offers the highest quality in a way, because for example, what dynamic lighting can't do is it can't do bounce lighting. It can't have light bouncing around between surfaces. You can't have global illumination. You can't have radiosity. You can't have any of that with dynamic lighting. You can have all of that with light mapping. Also, dynamic lighting and dynamic shadows are quite weak with complex shadows. For example, shadows that are fade out, or anything complex that happens with a shadow. For example, the light goes through a stained glass and you would get complex shadows because of that. All those kind of things. You can't really do that with dynamic lighting. You can with light mapping. So light mapping offers more flexibility. It offers higher quality in a way. But on the other hand, it's also more work to set it up, because the person modeling the asset has to set up all the light maps all the time. So you really have to set up the light maps. It takes a lot more time. It's more things to take into account. It also drives up the memory more, because the engine has to go remember all of these extra images. See, it generated all of this, and all of this is containing the information on the specular and the lighting. So it has to calculate all of this, That is what it does during the lighting rebuild. And then it's to store all of that, and that of course takes more memory. And lastly, you can usually see the pixels quite well, which is a bit of a quality problem. You can see it here as well. It's a bit jaggy, and that's pretty much the pixels. You can pretty much see the pixels here on these lines. And you can see the same here. You can see some kind of gradient, or I don't know what it is, but you can see these rings going through. And these bands. You can see it's a band of color every time. That's something you would never have with neither vertex lighting nor dynamic lighting. Those two are perfectly smooth, perfectly even. But light maps, they're a bit dirty. You can see here, you can basically see this is pretty much 1 pixel, 2 pixels, 3 pixel, 4 pixel. And it gets even worse when it's low quality. You can very clearly see this is 1 pixel, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The shadow as well. And that's of course not that nice. So that's the drawback with light mapping is it takes more memory, it takes more work to set it up, and you can sometimes see the pixels come through. It gets a bit more dirty and messy. On the plus side, however, light maps offer the best quality in terms of what you can get with complexity. You can get radiosity, global illumination, complex shadows, everything that's complex you can do with light mapping and you can't do with the other two systems. And you have most control as well. Vertex lighting has as benefit that it's smooth, it does not have compression, there's no pixels, there's no light map compression, artifacts and all those things. It's perfectly smooth, it's perfectly even, but the drawback is it also doesn't take that much memory. It kind of depends on the poly count of the meshes. Of course, if a mesh has more vertices, has a lot of vertices, say 10, 20,000 vertices, then there is more information to store, therefore the memory goes up. But in most cases it's a bit light on memory to have vertex lighting. And it's perfectly smooth, but you can get almost no detail in it. You can get almost no shadows to appear on them. Everything will be very smudgy and blurry. That's the drawback there. Also, light maps, while they take more memory, they are actually streamed. So the engine will forget about a light map if you're far away. So if I'm all the way over here, then the engine will forget about that light map or scale it down to a lower MIP level. With vertex lighting, it cannot do that. It has to remember the vertex lighting at all times, all the time. That's also a drawback. Also, while we're talking about vertex lighting, mobile devices on Unreal cannot render vertex lighting. So if you're making an iPad game, for example, you cannot use vertex lighting at all. Everything must be light mapped. Then dynamic lighting has an advantage, of course, that it's dynamic, so you can freely move the light around, which you cannot do with a light map light. So you can't move this in game. You can see if I move it, it immediately forgets about the light map, and then I have to rebuild again. So you can't move these lights around, but you can of course move dynamic lights around. So the benefit is you have dynamic lights, you can move them, you can change the color, you can turn them on and off during gameplay, which is nice. But they have a significant performance hit. That's something we'll get back to later. And they're very simplistic. There is no bounce lighting, there are no complex shadows. It's very simplistic. It pretty much just illuminates the scene within its radius, and that's it.